There's a person in your life who always seems to know. In a loud way, not in a way they announce. They just know. They knew that relationship was going to fall apart 6 months before it did. They knew that business decision was wrong before anyone ran the numbers. They knew something was off about that person the first time they met them. Maybe that person is someone you know. Maybe that person is you. And the thing that almost no one understands about that kind of knowing is where it actually comes from. It's not instinct, it's not luck, it's not some mystical quality that certain people are just born with. It is a specific cognitive process that some brains run more thoroughly than others. And today, we're going to talk about what that process actually is and why the people who have it almost never get credit for it. Here is what the world rewards: speed, confidence, the ability to produce an answer in the room in real time before anyone else. The person who speaks first is assumed to be the smartest. The person who speaks most is assumed to be the most engaged. This is one of the most consistent and quietly damaging myths in modern culture, because what speed actually measures is the length of the neural pathway between incoming information and spoken response. And a short pathway isn't the same thing as a good one. Think about two people reading the same article. One finishes in 3 minutes and can tell you what it said. The other takes 8 minutes and can tell you what it meant, what it got wrong, what it left out, and what it implies about something that happened 6 years ago. Same article, same words, completely different levels of processing. Extroverted brains tend toward the first model: fast intake, fast output, moving on. Introverted brains tend toward the second: slower intake, deeper processing, output that carries more weight. Neither is better for every situation, but one of them is significantly more useful in situations that actually matter. Here's what most people don't know about how this develops. Deep processing isn't only genetic. It can be, but for a lot of people, it's also learned. Think back to when you were young. If you grew up in an environment where the surface of things was not reliable, where what people said and what they meant were often two different things, your brain did something very specific. It learned that the first answer was not always the real answer, that the obvious interpretation was not always the correct one, that if you wanted to understand what was actually happening in the room, in a relationship, in a conversation, you had to look beneath the surface. And so you practiced that without knowing you were practicing it. Every time you sat quietly and watched instead of joining in, every time you held a question in your mind instead of asking it immediately, every time you waited to see if something turned out the way it seemed like it would, you were training a cognitive muscle that most people never develop. The world called it overthinking. It wasn't overthinking. It was the early stages of something that would eventually become your clearest and most reliable advantage. But here's what nobody tells you: knowing more doesn't always help you. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with deep processing that fast processors never experience. You walk out of a conversation and you're still in it. The person you were talking to forgot it 10 minutes later. You're still there at midnight, and there's something else. Deep processors are often the first to see what's wrong, the first to recognize a pattern, the first to understand what's actually happening, and the last to be believed. Because in a room that rewards speed, the person who says, "I need more time," is treated as someone who is behind. You have spent years watching fast processors get credit for ideas that were shallower than yours. You have sat in rooms where you knew the answer and said nothing, because by the time you were ready, someone else had already filled the silence. That is the cost, and it is real. But it is also, and this is important, not the full picture. Let's talk about what deep processing actually produces, not what it feels like, what it produces. Deep processors make better decisions under uncertainty. They are more accurate at detecting deception. They form fewer wrong first impressions and update their conclusions when evidence changes instead of defending them. They tend to be the people others turn to when something genuinely important needs to be figured out, not when something needs to be said quickly. Here's what extroverts are genuinely better at. They are better at fast social navigation, at networking, at keeping energy in a room, at getting things started. Here's what introverts are genuinely better at: understanding what is actually happening, catching what others miss, making decisions that hold up, building things, ideas, relationships, systems that last. The extrovert starts the conversation. The introvert understands what the conversation was actually about. That is not a consolation prize. That is a completely different and equally important cognitive role. The thing you were told was a weakness, the slowness, the depth, the tendency to stay in something longer than everyone else, is not a bug in your operating system. It is the operating system. The world will keep rewarding people who speak first, but the things that actually get built, understood, and changed are built, understood, and changed by people who went deeper. You were just taking the longer route, the one that actually gets there. You've been processing deeper than almost everyone around you your entire life. Quiet people, when it counts, almost always choose correctly. That's already waiting for you.